Well, most people watching this, John, will probably know you from the television, one of the best known faces in racing. How did the jump from the typewriter to the TV come about?
Well, there's one person you can blame, the old school tie, Julian Wilson. He was my contemporary at Harrow, and we were school bookmakers together. So two of us, he was in Westacre, a house on the far end of the hill. I was in the headmaster's, right in the centre of it. And we were the people that they used to come to bet with. And the bets were sixpence or a shilling. 5 bob, 5 shillings was a big bet, 25p. You really were moving now. And it was to do with mainly who would win the Harrow Football Cup or be head of the house or anything, things domestic, things like that. Because you couldn't bet in those days. Any bets that you ever had, you had to write them to McLaughlin's in Glasgow. There's virtually nobody else. So send the written bet. Imagine doing that now. So they received the bet after the race had been run. And they had to look at the stamp on the envelope to see it was sent before the race. So my job in the headmaster's house was to be about 6:30 to where the letters came to go and grab the betting ones from McLaughlin. So it was all very difficult. And taking bets with Julian Wilson. And I remember in the spring term, we had the cross-country run. And there must be 100 runners or 200 runners in or whatever it was. And the hot favourite was the captain of athletics. And Julian Wilson came up to me and said, well, what price is so-and-so? I said, well, 2 on, you know, with me, bottle on, 2 on. You know, I got 100 runners on my side. You know, Ben Keith would love that, wouldn't he? Or Star Sports would be absolutely rejoicing. 100 runners in the race. But there was no handicapping or all that. So 2 to 1 on, Julian Wilson had a 5 on it. Well, that was a monster bet. £5 on the hot favourite. So every time I saw him walking up and down the high street for the next month or so, I wanted to kick him and everything like that. Of course, he won easily, and so Julian I skinted out and all that sort of thing. So the school bookmaker was Julian Wilson anyway. And then when I was coursing correspondent of the Sporting Life, there was an unfortunate incident among the sub-editors on BBC One Grandstand. Remember when David Coleman and Frank Boff and Des Lynam fronted it, and in the background there are 4 or 5 hacks, you know, subbing the news and giving the information over, and mainly football and all that thing. So I joined them for the racing when the chap who was doing the racing, I don't know what the story was, but anyway, Julian got me the job. So it was entirely down to the old school rule. I'd never have got the job with the credentials that I had if it hadn't been for Julian Wilson. And you can always say the old school tie is a horrible anachronism of a Britain that's long past. I say thank God for the old school tie. Anyway, so that got me into Grandstand. And they had just terrific years. I used to get into Grandstand about 9 o'clock and start working and preparing. And David Coleman was a horrible man. Horrible man. Bully, aggressive, domineering, but a brilliant journalist. And when you see, for instance, Jeff Stelling now doing a fantastic job on Sky and bringing in on the Gillette special on Saturday afternoons, and any result comes in, all the shot v Plymouth and this Plymouth's third defeat and all that thing. The man who started it was David Coleman. Teleprinter coming in, and Bournemouth the Gilling, whatever it may be, that's Bournemouth's third consecutive win. It was marvellous. Absolutely marvellous. He didn't have long notes and television things to go and be told what it was. He knew straight away. He did his homework. Everybody marvelled. That was the first time it was ever done. And Jeff Stelling's taken it totally to a new level because of the new machinery and all that. That's helped. So worked with David Coleman. Frank Boff, lovely man. Really a real swine. Very humble. What happened to him? You know, he was ditched from journalism with various things. good commentator as well, football commentator, Frank Boff. Des Lynam, what a sweetie, what a lovely man to work with. As he came on the screen, so he was. So there were some lovely people there, and the people I worked with, and yes, they went in at 9 o'clock, prepared for it. And of course, one of my least proud stories here. One of the jobs I had after the racing was over, the racing finished about just before 3 o'clock on the television, was to when the football started then, was to update the scores. So Arsenal 1, Liverpool 0, and all that kind of thing. And the trouble was, we were so much hatred of ITV at the BBC then. I'm not saying it's good, I'm not proud of it certainly, but I was very much part of it. So of course we had the ITV monitor beside us, what ITV was showing, and in those days the two big matches ITV had going straight into their Thames headquarters, so they were giving the results first. So here was Arsenal playing Liverpool or Manchester United against I'll say the two, Newcastle, as though we were important then, and I wouldn't put those results up because ITV had shown them, and therefore it was ridiculous to even think nobody was sitting with two televisions and saying, oh my God, ITV have beaten BBC or anything like that. It was absolutely parochial, totally inconsiderate of the viewers themselves, what they wanted. But they weren't getting really the big scores. The other ones are flashing up, beat BBC, because we were faster. So I was determined to be faster. And I was shouting up the gallery, here's the result, get them up quick, please, hurry up, and all that sort of thing. And they're fed up with this voice going on. But the big games, they weren't getting up-to-date scores. So can you believe anyone having that attitude? But the whole of the BBC went along with it. I said the whole of the BBC, the sports people knew what was happening. But it was sheer, you learn in life. Anyone who has the same views at 20 and has had at 20 when they're 50 or 60, there's something wrong with them. You change, you adapt, you moderate, you realise what's right and what's wrong, and if ever there was something really wrong, depriving, millions of viewers were watching, say the big rugby international, whatever it was, on the BBC, and weren't getting flashed across the footy scores of the big two games, well, you can imagine. So there was an up and down time at the BBC, but I love the BBC. Loved working there. We used to do it in Lime Grove, being a sub-editor, and seeing all the great stars who used to come in, the great boxers and tennis stars before game used to come in for interviews with Coleman or Boff or Des Lynam, and it was a great atmosphere to work in. I was roughly left alone because Coleman, Frank Boff and Des Lynam didn't know much about racing. Coleman always used to shout in, he wanted some obscure thing just to go and show me up and everything. But they relied on what they got, and it was I really I think, I hate to say it, one of the best times of my life was working for the BBC. But then the editor of ITV Sport left, or the producer or editor, I forget what he was, of BBC Sport. BBC Sport left, and he went to ITV, and he'd seen what I was like and everything like that, and he asked me to go across and work on the local London ITV, which was I think 6 o'clock on a Friday. We used to have a sports half hour previewing the sports and all that sort of thing. So I went and did that. That was about 1980. And it was a year before ITV took over some big race courses, some big racing contracts, and it included Epsom for Derby. And I'd always said, what on earth are we doing here? Just showing the Exchange Telegraph prices shows as they were going into betting shops. That was the shows we were doing, which I was doing for the BBC. We used to put it, in those days there weren't the machines that you put them up with. They were put up with little, say 6 to 4 and 5 to 4 and all that sort of thing. So we were doing this. I used to do a midweek down at Broadcasting House, and on Saturdays used to help out in give John Tidy, he was the man responsible for the graphics, and give him a prize to put up, and he used to put it up. So we were doing this, and I was always saying, why haven't we got somebody on the course? We've got people on the course talking about the paddock, people on the course commentating on the race, Sullivan and Wilson and all that. Why wasn't somebody? But nothing was done, and betting was very difficult then. You know, O'Sullivan did really well to try and get in. He used to keep quiet while the voices came over from the bookmakers, and the punters at home could hear them. So, you know, efforts were made, and so when I went there, they had me sort of doing the betting, and able to stand in the betting ring, but there was no practice for it. And so the big race of the year, you can argue, is the Derby. So the first race I ever did shrieking and screaming in the betting ring was Shergar's Derby. And saying odds on Shergar's tits on, and this, that and the other, and the choir boy Walter Swinburne, and all that sort of thing. And it's 7-1 bar the one, Lint of Gold, whoever it was. And it was, you know, I fancy at a time you've had no practice, no rehearsal. And you just go in and they shove you in doing the Derby. And for ITV, it really was big. I remember we used to have a meeting in January. Who should we get? Well, we'll get Joan Collins, and we'll go and get the president of somewhere, or whatever else it was. We used to end up with a raving mad disc jockey or whatever it was, whoever we finally got. But it was that kind of preparation they did, and they put you up in luxury hotels, and you know, right near to Epsom, and we built a sort of team up, and it was run by Andrew Franklin, and he must have been the youngest, obviously, ever head of ITV Sport, and he sort of controlled it, and of course he loved his racing, which very few sports editors do. You know, you're lucky if you've got a sports editor who knows anything about racing. Nowadays, it's even worse. Nowadays, you know, most sports editors don't care about racing. They give the fantastic supplements they go and give for the big meetings, but the rest of the times, you know, we would be horrified in our day if ever one national paper went without one race, let alone whole cards being dropped. Now you're lucky if you get a card in most papers, I say most. And the exception of that is the Racing Post, which is exceptionally good. I think it's been done. You know, Bruce Millington and his team do a fantastic job on the Racing Post, and people criticise them. And people come to me and say, "Oh, John, I remember the day I used to love the Sporting Life, and it was so good. It was so good in its time, but now people would never sell a single copy against the Racing Post as it was in my day. It is so much better now." And it's sad, the decline in the coverage in the press is one of the big worries that racing has got. It's got lots of other worries. But the trouble with that is it symptomizes the decline in interest in horse racing generally. In the old days, so many people would know the Grand National winner at the supermarket. Not that I go in a supermarket, of course, but people apparently in supermarkets, you were talking about the jockey who won the Grand National. Now nobody could name last year's Grand National, virtually in the public, let alone the jockey, and let alone the Derby. You know, the jockey won the Derby and all that sort of thing. So it is a decline in interest in horse racing, except for the huge fixtures. So for the Cheltenhams and the Derby and Royal Ascot and lesser so York Goodwood, apart from them, there's virtually no interest in racing, and that is one of our big troubles.